Well, let's now start with panel one, lessons and learning of age verification in Brazil and abroad. To open the discussion, we would like to invite our keynote speaker, Tony Allen, Project Director of Age Assurance Technology Trial. Let me invite as the moderator, coordinator of CGI.br, Renata Miele. Let me also invite our debater, Ricardo Horta, Director of Risk Prevention in the Digital World from the Ministry of Justice and Public Safety. Let me invite Lorena Coutinho, Director of ANPD, Data Protection National Agency. We also have Nora Bivo with OECD, McCain with Meta, Tiago Tavares with SaferNet Brazil, Emanuela Halfa of Alana Institute, and to complete the panel, I'd like to invite Elora Fernandez with QU Leuven in Belgium, and she's going to be online with us. Thank you. Well, let me hand it over to Renata Miele, who is going to be the moderator.
Hello, everyone. Good morning once again. Before we officially hand over to our keynote speaker, I have some remarks to make about this next panel. I would like to thank deeply the whole team who works for the committee on behalf of Kelly and Giuliano, who helped to put together this event. I also would like to greet the CGI advisors. I'm not gonna, call your names because there are several representatives of our center here, Rafael, Enrique, Bianca. And today is just the beginning of a journey. I have been questioned constantly about the greatest challenge or bottleneck of digital ECI from now on. And I have chosen one of them, despite not being a technical indicator in the implementation of ECA, that is the most sensitive one, which is to properly communicate to the Brazilian society about the new rules, what are the company's liabilities, what has changed in our interaction throughout the several internet applications to be able to deeply understand the meaning of this law. If we are not successful in communicating that message, we won't have a law which is efficient. The goal with this law is to bring it together families, state members, where together we'll be able to find the best solution for the implementation of the law. And the law is quite broad. We lost her sound. I'm sorry. We are on a panel addressing age verification, which has been a very hot topic in the digital ECA. But digital ECA, it's not just about age verification, which is just one of the issues addressed by the digital ECA, which is much broader as it looks after the age indication, age assurance, guidance to some types of content which are proper for children and adolescents. ECA also addresses the screen addiction by children with a number of consequences to our children physical and mental health, and that is not really related to age verification. These are just some of the examples. ECA also talk about monetization of activities of children and adolescents in digital environments. As you can see, it is a set of questions, but indeed, age verification is one of them, and it's very important. And why is that? Age verification will impact all internet users' experience anytime they access some types of services. And to foster this panel discussion, I would like to say that age verification will not be implemented to all content providers or internet application. Age verification will be applied just to those who represent any sort of risks to children and adolescents. And there is something else. Age verification is not a synonym of users' identification in the digital environment. Neither children or child verification nor an adult who will perform an age verification to access a website of alcoholic beverages, as the self-declaration is no longer enough for children protection. We are not going to have a verification of Ricardo who will buy a bottle of beer after this long, intense journey. But that website will understand that the person who is getting into the website is an adult and not a child, regardless if it's John, Mary, myself, Tony, Lona, doesn't matter. And that should be clear to everyone as we are here talking about the proper protection for privacy, personal data, and age verification. This became or turned to be a new paradigm into two dimensions. First, we guarantee children and adolescent protection while in the digital environment, according to our constitution, which states that children, they have a total preference. And second, because into practical terms, we are proving that Brazilian state has its sovereignty to define upon the rules of service providers in the digital environment all around the Brazilian territory. We are experiencing a time where some players are facing countries' autonomy in defining their own rules. And Brazil is now introducing robust rules, and our rules are one of the best in the world for protecting children and adolescents, thanks to the mechanisms that we have with companies. And to close, CGI has collaborated to the subsides. And during this contribution process, we have identified 7 sensitive aspects which should be better understood within the age verification process. First, needs and proportionality. Age verification should be applied in accordance to the level of risks, avoiding unnecessary demands at low-risk environments for children, such as educational platform. 2, private and data protection by default. Once you collect the data for age verification, such data should be disposed in order not to be used once again for other means. Inclusion and non-discrimination. Age verification tools, they should be feasible to include the society as a whole and not interrupt someone else's access. Technical security of tools, interoperability, and open standards. These are key aspects to us as we face a reality where social and economic inequalities is huge, different from other countries. And I cannot say to a family whose the mother has an Android smartphone and the child has another operational system, the father has an iOS. I cannot tell them that systems will not talk one to another during the verification. Therefore, interoperability is key, as well as transparency and auditing of those mechanisms of age verification. With that, we feel so proud to host this event on the first day. Yesterday was day 0, today is day 1, where we understand that today is the first day of a very long journey. Internet has not woken up differently, but that is an adaptation phase, technical, regulatory, and also cultural by the Brazilian society as how we'll be able to protect our children and adolescents. And with that, I'd like to give the floor to our keynote speaker. I have his mini bio. Just give me a second. So we are going to have Tony Allen. Tony Allen is an expert in technologies of age verification. He's a project director for the Age Assurance Technology Trial, which is an initiative by the UK government for technical solutions and age verification in digital environment. He's got a broad experience with online protection, and he's been collaborating for the development of standards and public policies for the safety of children and adolescents in the internet. You have the floor, Mr. Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here today in Brasília. I also like to thank the committee and the relationship with the UK. My Portuguese is very bad. I'm sorry.
Brazil is entering a new phase with the Digital Statute for Children and Adolescents, the ECA Digital, coming into force this week. This is a significant step, but I want to start with a reassuring message for Brazil. You are not alone. I'm going to move to the next slide. Have we got some slides? Do I have to press a button? There we are.
Can talk more loudly, please.
There we go. Obrigado. You are not alone. This is happening everywhere. There are countries around the world are grappling with exactly the same question that you are asking. How do we protect children in the digital environment while preserving fundamental rights, privacy, innovation, and access to information? Just in the last few years, we have seen legislation, policy initiatives, and regulatory debates emerge across Europe, North America, Australia, Asia, and increasingly across Latin America. This map is just the countries that are represented at the Global Age Assurance Standards Summit coming up in 3 weeks' time in Manchester in the UK. It doesn't even represent all the ones that are looking at this subject. The UK, the EU, Australia, several US states, France, Germany, Ireland, Spain, and many others are all trying to solve the same problem. So Brazil does not need to start from zero. In fact, Brazil is in a very strong position because it can learn from what has already worked and what has not. And that is what I'm here to talk about today. So let me start with that global picture. Across the world, we're seeing a shift in how policymakers think about protecting children online. For many years, the dominant approach was education, parental controls, and voluntary industry action. Those things remain important, but they have proven insufficient on their own. Governments are increasingly recognizing something quite simple. If services are meant for adults, and the law says children should not access to them, there must be some mechanism to distinguish adults from children. And that mechanism is what we call age assurance. Now, age assurance is not a single technology. It is a broad category that includes age verification. Age verification is where you find somebody's date of birth, wherever that is held, and bind that date of birth to the person, and then work out how old they are. It is as simple as that. Age estimation is about the analysis of features of humans that vary with age. Our face, voice, our hands, our pulse, the length of our arms are all features of humans that vary with age. And age inference is where you find out any other fact about an individual other than their date of birth, and it can be anything. Their school grade, the fact they work for the government, that they have a credit card, that they are a licensed commercial airline pilot. In fact, there is literally hundreds and thousands of ways in which you can draw an inference about somebody being an adult or a child. And technology is out there to support all of those different methodologies. So you shouldn't just be thinking about identity. Because one critically important policy step for governments around the world is that age assurance is not identity assurance. The goal is not to identify who you are. The goal is simply to answer the question, is this person old enough to access these goods, this service, this content, a particular venue, or an age-restricted space? Now, different countries are implementing different models. The UK's Online Safety Act includes age assurance requirements for certain categories of services. The European Union's Digital Services Act includes upcoming identity frameworks. Australia has completed the trials of age assurance technologies, which I had the pleasure of leading. It was Australia rather than the UK, but this is the summary report of that, which is all freely available online from the Australian government. It is 1,150 pages and will certainly cure any sleep deprivation that you've got. And also we have several US states that have introduced age verification requirements for different types of content. So the first lesson from the international context is this. Age assurance is no longer theoretical. It is already happening. The real debate today is not whether it can be done. The debate is whether it can be done well. So sometimes you will hear in these policy debates, some familiar argument. Age assurance doesn't work. It's impossible. It will always be bypassed. But if we step back, we can see that society already manages age restrictions in many contexts. Think about alcohol. Think about tobacco. Think about gambling. Think about films with age ratings. Think about buying a lottery ticket. In all of these situations, we have a simple principle. If something is age restricted, there must be a way to check age. Now, of course, those systems are not perfect. When I was younger, and I suspect I'm not alone in this room, young people sometimes found ways to do things they were not supposed to do. Teenagers have always been inventive. We tried to buy alcohol before we were old enough. We watched films we were probably too young to see. We played video games that our parents might not have approved of. Children have always tested boundaries, and they always will. But society has never said, well, some teenagers might break the rules, so perhaps we should remove the rules entirely. We do not say, because some 16-year-olds manage to buy tobacco, we should make it legal for them to do so. Instead, we accept a more realistic principle. Age restrictions do not need to be perfect. They need to be reasonable, effective, and proportionate. And increasingly, technology is making age assurance far more sophisticated than simple ID checks we may have been familiar with offline. Now, there are systems that estimate age from facial analysis without identifying the person. There are privacy-preserving digital credentials. There are anonymous tokens proving age without revealing identity. There are third-party verification systems designed specifically to protect user privacy. And importantly, we now have a published and freely available international standard, which I was the editor of, which is ISO 27566. And this provides guidance for privacy-preserving age assurance. Standards like these are important because they move the conversation away from theoretical arguments and towards accountability and quality. But the question becomes not simply, are you checking age, but are you doing it in a way that is accurate, privacy-preserving, secure, and independently auditable? And that's where certification and standards play a crucial role. So I'm just going to briefly break the new international standard down because it does three foundational things. It sets the terminology. It has a global consensus on what we mean by age assurance, who the relevant parties are and the entities, and the descriptions of components and systems and what they do. It sets out 5 core characteristics. Functional characteristics. What is it? What is it meant to do? What is it intended to do? How does it correctly relate the result to the individual and ensure that it's correctly shared with the relying party? Performance characteristics. How well does it do that? How accurate is it? How reliable is it? How is it protected from bias? Privacy characteristics. How well does the system protect our personal data, minimize its collection, limit its purpose, and protect our digital footprint? Security characteristics. How well is the system protected from spoofing, circumvention, presentation attack, deep fakes, and how does it deal with contraindicators? And acceptability characteristics. How inclusive is the system? How does it support users with additional needs? How do you complain about it? And how do you seek redress? And then finally, it sets out global expectations for transparency, accountability, and trust through the publication of practice statements by providers, intermediaries, and relying parties. These provide the opportunity for users, consumers, businesses, governments, and regulators, as well as campaigners, whether they're for or against, to understand what the age assurance is doing. Overall, it provides a global bedrock for understanding, defining, examining, and deploying effective age assurance systems. I want to move on to talk about some lessons from other public health battles. Now, what might seem slightly different, but actually has very strong parallels, and that is the history of tobacco regulation. For decades, tobacco companies used a series of arguments to resist regulation. Some of those arguments might sound very familiar. One argument was, it's the parents' responsibility. Another was, we should focus on youth education instead of regulation. Another was, the technology to enforce restrictions is impossible. Another was, if we introduce regulation, the black market will grow. These arguments appeared again and again, but over time, governments recognized something important. When a product or service carries risks, particularly risks to children, responsibility cannot sit only with parents. Parents cannot regulate entire digital ecosystems. They cannot redesign algorithms, they cannot enforce terms of service, and they cannot redesign platforms. And they cannot realistically supervise every moment of their child's digital life. Parents are important partners in protecting children, but they cannot do it alone. That responsibility must sit with service providers, regulators, policymakers, and society more broadly. And history shows that when regulation is introduced thoughtfully, industries adapt. Technology improves. Systems become more sophisticated. What once seemed impossible becomes normal. And this brings us to an important point about the role of industry. It's debates like this that are very easy to fall into the idea that the problem is simply big tech equals bad, and an American big tech equals worse. But the reality is much more complicated than that. If society wants a service to exist, whether that service is tobacco, alcohol, gambling, social media, someone will supply it. For economists, that is the supply-side response to consumer demand. Broadly speaking, there are only three possibilities. The government can do it, private companies can do it, or criminals will do it. That's a lesson from Prohibition-era politics with moonshine and illicit trade and tobacco. Most societies do not want governments running social media platforms. And we certainly don't want criminals running social media platforms, which means in practice these services will be operated by private companies responding to market demand. So the objective cannot be simply to attack that industry for existing. The objective must be to set the rules of the game, define the safeguards, and define the responsibilities. And also, importantly, to hold those companies to account. Because we cannot reasonably criticize companies for not doing enough to protect children, and at the same time criticize them when they try to implement protections. The real goal is not to eliminate this industry. The goal is responsible industry operating within clear and enforceable guidelines. The concept of age assurance has not suddenly dropped from the sky. It has emerged as a demand of parents, and in brackets, I put voters, of their politicians. It is the demand of for these proportionate safeguards like age-appropriate design and effective age assurance that this comes in. Big tech has been grappling with this too, not entirely successfully, as it tries to balance the demand for freedom of access, use, play, engagement, usability, and let's face it, commerciality, with the constraints of user behavior, unintended consequences, criminal exploitation, and abuse. Accepting this, however, we should absolutely be keeping them on their toes. The tobacco tactics of the 1970s and 1980s are the same tactics we see today from big tech. The playbook is the same. The arguments are the same. The justification for addiction is the same. The deferral of responsibility and accountability is the same. People argue that social media isn't a killer like tobacco. I'll grant you, there's no evidence linking social media to terminal cancer. But here's what it is linked to. Anxiety, depression, self-harm among young people, body image pressure, eating disorder, particularly amongst adolescent girls, sexual grooming, exploitation, and sextortion, where criminals use the very same platforms to target children, bullying, harassment, and following young people home through the device in their pocket, sleep disruption, addictive design patterns, and keeping children online late into the night, and linked to loss of educational focus and attainment as algorithms compete for the attention that used to belong to learning. None of these harms affect every child, But at population scale, the evidence is clear. The risks are real, measurable, and concentrated among young people. And when a product or service exposes children to measurable harm at scale, history tells us something important. We simply do not say, well, parents should try harder. We do not say, well, teenagers will always find a way. And we certainly do not say, well, the companies making billions from these systems bear no responsibility. Instead, what we do as societies, and we have always done, is introduce proportionate safeguards, age limits, safety requirements, accountability, because protecting children has never meant eliminating all risks. It means reducing risk to a level society considers acceptable. And that is exactly what age assurance enters the conversation. So bringing it back to Brazil and the opportunities for Brazil, and I'm going to highlight 4. The first is you have the distinct advantage of learning from others. Many countries are experimenting with age assurance online. Some approaches are working well, some are encountering difficulties, and Brazil can observe those experiences and avoid repeating mistakes. I would focus on outcomes, not on technology. Technology evolves very, very quickly. Regulation that mandates a specific tool or a specific approach will quickly become outdated. Frameworks should focus on principles, accuracy, privacy, security, transparency, and accountability. Standards and certification will matter. ISO 27566 has been out since December. It is being adopted around the world. It is widely cited and referred to in the ANPD guidance on age verification. And it offers a way to build that trust and consistency. Certification can help regulators verify that systems meet appropriate benchmarks. And I had the pleasure of spending the afternoon yesterday with the president of ANPD and his commissioners and staff working through exactly how certification and standards can help them in their day-to-day tasks. It gives industry a chance to earn recognition for doing the right thing and to hold them to account for not doing enough. And fourth, this is not only a technical challenge, it is a governance challenge. Age assurance touches on privacy, cybersecurity, identity, platform governance, human rights, child protection. It's why a multi-stakeholder dialogue, like the discussion happening here today, is so important. Because no single group can solve this alone. Governments cannot do it alone. Industry cannot do it alone. Civil society cannot do it alone. But together it becomes possible to build systems that are effective, proportionate, and respectful of rights. So let me end where I began. Brazil is entering a new phase in the protection of children online. The implementation of ECA Digital this week is an important milestone. There will be challenges. There will be lots of noise. There will be debates. There will undoubtedly be disagreements about the best path forward. That is normal. But international experience shows something encouraging. The question is no longer whether protecting children online is possible. The question is how well we do it. And Brazil now has the opportunity to design an approach that reflects its values of innovation, rights, privacy, and the fullest protection of children and adolescents possible. Obrigado.
Muito obrigada, Tony. Acho que sua palestra foi muito elucidativa e reforça algumas das questões que a gente trouxe aqui
Thank
no
you
início.
very much. I think you've been reinforcing some of the issues that we have been making. I think that the way, let me start again, she says. Thank you very much, Tony, for your talk. I think it was extremely enlightening. You have brought a number of elements that we have listed before, right? And I really enjoyed the way that you approached the problems of children and adolescents. They are always trying to go beyond their limits, right? It's their own way, and we shouldn't create that a bubble for them not to give it a try. It's part of development, isn't it? Trying to go beyond your limits is part of development. But we should create a shared protective chain, government, society, and family. Thank you. Thank you very much. We don't have much time, but I would like to ask Ricardo Horta. He has a master's in neuroscience. He has PhD in law, master's in neuroscience, and he's a visiting researcher of École Normale Supérieure in France. He is a faculty in the master's in program in Brasília. He's a member of a specialist in public policy and governmental agency, and he's been working for 15 years in the area. He's the director of risk prevention in digital area in the secretary of Justice and Public Security, where he coordinates the policies of children in the digital world. For months, he has been fighting for the appropriate enforcement of digital ECA. I really admire your work, your dedication, and how much attention you've dedicated to this topic in Brazil. Thank you, Ricardo. Thanks, everyone. I have a presentation, and but we just have 5 minutes. We all know why our time's up, right? Because we've changed their schedule. Renata started quite well. Tony was amazing in his talk. But you see, Renata, we do have a challenge of communication. It's not something easy, I have to say. I'm not going to go through the slides, but just let me make some differentiation that I've identified as being extremely important. I would appreciate if you could share the slides. First, digital ECA was approved or passed by the Chamber of Representatives. And in age verification, in the Ministry of Justice, we had been studying it since 2024. I met Tony in an international event in December 24. And that's exactly when he said, yes, you can do it. You can work on age verification. It's fine. So we started the process before the law was passed of understanding the tools, the techniques, and to make sure that we have children's protection. One important tool to use is rather to adapt the user of internet users to their age. We are not going to say that the internet of a 4-year-old is going to be the same as an 8-year-old internet to that of a 13 or an adult. Impossible. And that's not how the law sees it. And we do have the technology that can provide that. We had public consultation. We heard the society. We heard the companies. We've had nearly 100 meetings with all players. We've understood the pain points, issues, and problems. And a very important thing that we are going to do, that probably is going to be signed by the president this afternoon, which is a differentiation of Article 9 between what is an appropriate, inadequate content from forbidden content. Of course, it's forbidden, it's inappropriate and inadequate, right? Of course. But not everything is forbidden by law. We are talking about progressive autonomy. We are talking about having a family support internet navigation. I'm not talking about access barrier. For example, audiovisual, everybody knows the indicative classification of audiovisual. You all know streaming, movies, soap opera, TV programs. They ask us all the time to classify third-party content, for example. So yes, there is indicative classification. There is parental control mechanisms. We are not talking about age verification barriers. It's different from what the legislation in Brazil has always forbidden. The only difference are the compensation or benefit boxes. But no games are being forbidden. But to release a feature in a game which has a multi-box, you should have age verification. This is what we want to talk about, reasonability. Progressively, we'll have to understand that there are different mechanisms. If we try to explain what are the assurance and verification of age, which are the case differences. When should we really check the specific age or the date of birth of a child with all different elements, but no identification, no retention of IDs, no facial recognition to access internet content? We know that in upcoming months, different companies will adopt different solutions. Eventually, some of them will not be good for users, will seem odd, will not work, as a popular game has already tried. Companies will say, well, I'm just complying with digital ECA. But who is going to say whether they are complying with it or not? ANPD. So do not believe in what you read about it. Companies are going to implement the solutions they like or are readily available that they can afford. And the government is going to try to find free public and private solutions for those who cannot afford them. This is something that we've been diligently working with because it involves access. I know my time's up, but yeah, still have got one more minute. And
Tony has attested the verified credentials. We know that we have zero knowledge proof. That is a technology which we believe that in a country with this infrastructure that can become massive. This is a technology which preserves users' identity. Therefore, that will be one of our main solutions. And to conclude, Renata has highlighted in her talk about the principles that we have for age verification. These are the requirements. We have always been asked if that decree will add any technology. We never thought about adding any specific technology to a decree. First, because technology has evolved very fast and decrees are difficult to be changed. Second, we didn't want to privilege some players in opposition to others. We know that in the Brazilian territory, we are going to have a number of different solutions. Some will work, others not. And also because this is a area for the autonomous regulatory agency, which will start a regulatory process of dialogue, public hearing with all the players to design a regulation which is aligned to everyone's interests, where we are going to have a convergence to international solutions. So all companies will have a chance to implement solutions like that, respecting, of course, all the principles. So we need to have that necessary flexibility. I would like to thank your presence and participation. I apologize. I know that, some people came yesterday, and, Tony as well. We would like to apologize for all these changes in our schedule. But anyway, we are very optimistic because the Brazilian government will state that ECA is true. We have challenges, and ECA became a reality. Absolute priority and protection has to be available in digital settings. That is where children are nowadays. We have to, prepare ourselves in the internet environment, so then children and adolescents will be able to access content. And children and adolescents, they represent 1/3 of our users. So we are happy to see that internet is to all, but for that we have to allow safety to everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Ricardo. Public policy cannot be done just with reasoning, but also with your affections. It's difficult to be women in some sectors, but as a mother and working in this forefront for so long, I get really moved to know that now we are able to allow that to our society, the Brazilian society. Each one of us who's got a child, a grandchild, a niece or a nephew, you know how much they are absorbed in the web without any protection. And now we are going to allow that protection. And I get really moved with all this achievement. I could not thank everyone for all your efforts. I'm about to cry. Now I'm going to hand over to Lorena Coutinho, who is Director of the National Agency of Data Protection, ANPD. I'm very glad to know that ANPD is a partner in this endeavor. She is a doctor, a PhD by the University of Maastricht, and she's got a graduation by the University of Brasília. She is an economist, and she has worked with digital policies in the OECD. She was part of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce as an internet developer, and also acting in public policies in the international business. You have the floor, Lorena. Thank you, Renata. I am also very moved to be here today. This is a historical day for Brazil, as digital ECA represents a gain to the Brazilian society. And CGI was an amazing partner to ANPD in the past months, where we could have a dialogue together with the society. I also like to thank the IDP, which is an academic society, also helping with the debate. And also I'd like to greet a number of colleagues that are here today with me in this panel. We are in the vanguard of children and adolescents protection. Our law is one of the most advanced in the globe, and age assurance is in the core of this discussion. We know about the importance of age verification, and we also know that age verification represents a huge challenge. Tony Allen addressed all the nuances in this effort, and ANPD is aware of the technical complexity in implementing those mechanisms for age verification. That's why we keep on talking with the society. But as Tony Allen said, we are not alone, which is good news. This is a topic that has been discussed for so long, and ANPD, together with all of you, we may take steps ahead to improve our agenda. Last year, ANPD has released this technological radar for age verification. That was a very broad study which was a starting point for discuss and debate all these topics with the company and civil society. In addition, last year, we started monitoring 37 companies under the scope of digital ECA, allowing us to have a better knowledge and understanding how companies are participating, as well as promoting a direct dialogue with companies. With that, we improved our goals. And we have two important announcements to share. In the next few days after the publication of the decree, we are going to announce first a small guide, a mini guide with the preliminary guidance for reliable mechanisms for age verification. That is going to work as a preliminary guide where we are going to help companies in implementing those mechanisms. And not only, we will also share a timeline for implementation. We do understand that there are technical obstacles for implementing those mechanisms, and we have chosen this scalable implementation based on other countries who also implemented age verification. The guided principles which you are going to find in this mini guide for reliable age verification mechanisms, and they talk to other mechanisms. So there is a convergence as to the importance to technological neutrality and risk proportionality. Tony Allen said that age verification technologies, they developed so fast. So it's not to the regulator to identify which technologies to be implemented, but rather which parameters should be taken into account in each one of the contexts where they should be balanced in accordance to the level of risks. Second, a need to balance accuracy on one side for data protection. Let's make that very clear. Age verification is not identification or age ID, and we have today efficient tools to balance that, such as the zero knowledge proof, verified tokens, excellent tools. Third, a need to non-discriminatory effects and fostering inclusion. We don't want that age verification turns into a barrier to access to digital services. As to the timeline that we are about to publish very soon, such a timeline comprises 3 phases. The first one, we carry out an active monitoring, a type of assisted implementation in some sectors, which we believe they have a more protective effect to children and adolescents, where we want to promote a dialogue to better understand how those mechanisms are being adopted by a number of sectors, and also understand the technological and regulatory obstacles. Second step, once that is solved, we'll be able to propose definitive guidance for the age verification tools after the public hearing, of course. And those guidances, they will follow an adaptation phase. And just then, we'll be able to step into a phase where those rules will be endorsed. These are then the 3 phases which I would like to highlight. My time is up, but even though I would like to share these relevant messages, there are so many messages being addressed and shared here today, and it's up to us to be very clear and straightforward about this implementation schedule. And I also like to highlight that all processes, they will be followed by public hearings, including the participation of children and adolescents in the process. That is a key recommendation, because we have to have this direct dialogue. Professor Sonia Livingston is one of the greatest experts in this topic, and you are going to have the opportunity to hear her later on during this session. So once again, we are all experiencing a very important time. We have much work to keep doing. Internet is not going to change from day to night, but the private sector is already implementing a number of measures, and that will require a continuous process. Therefore, you are all invited to participate at public hearings and dialogues promoted by ANPD. We do know that this is a process to be built up by several people with transparency and open dialogue. Thank you. Thank you, Lorena. This is a key message. There are phases which slowly will be pursued. Like an online game, you have to pass the first phase to reach the second, and so on and so forth, where finally we are going to win the battle. I know how anxious everyone might be, but we have to be very responsible and to guarantee a successful result. Now I'd like to hand over to Nora Beauvoir. I don't know if I am pronouncing your last name correctly or not. She is part of the Organization for Collaboration and Economic Development, OECD, where she addresses topics addressing digital economy, internet governance to public policies for users in the online environment. She was one of the responsibles for the age assurance practices of online services used by children developed by the OECD.
But please bear with me. So for those who may not know, the OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We have 38 member countries, and really what we do is that we try to find solutions to common challenges in a range of different areas, so ranging from economy, governance, trade, agriculture, education, health, and online safety. And to do so, we conduct policy and legal analysis to inform policymaking and ultimately making people's lives better. So the OECD has recently published 2 companion reports on age assurance. The first one that is on the right on the screen is a legal and policy mapping of age assurance across OECD countries. And the second one, which I had the pleasure to lead, is a benchmarking report that looks at the policies and practices on age assurance for 50 online services that children use. And if you want to access it, there's a QR code, but you can access both reports on the OECD website. So I'm going to focus on this report today. I'm going to start with saying a few words about the methodology, and then I will share with you 3 key insights from the report. So first of all, we selected 50 online services that are categorized into 10 different groups. So we looked at app stores, social media, gaming services, pornography, dating services, and so on. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but we wanted to have a representative sample with 4 objectives in mind. First of all, we wanted to take into account the multifaceted nature of risks that children face online. Second, we wanted to have a broad range of services in terms of functionalities that they offer. Third, we wanted to really capture what children are doing online, so the services that children actually use. And 4, we wanted to be representative in terms of geographic locations, because of course, children may not use the same services in different parts of the world. Now, how did we proceed? So we drafted a template questionnaire that looks at different aspects of age assurance. For example, age limits. Does the service set a minimum age before granting access to the service? We also looked at age assurance mechanisms. So does the service use in practice age assurance, age verification, age estimation, perhaps both? We also looked at age-tiered safeguards, and by this we mean if a service applies by default settings to prohibit certain functionalities or access to certain parts of the service to certain age groups. And lastly, we looked at complaint mechanisms, appeals mechanisms, transparency, etc. And so we filled out this template questionnaire for each of the 50 services based on their governing documents and other publicly available information. Now I would like to share with you 3 key findings from the report. First, we see that most services set a minimum age. However, this minimum age can sometimes be overruled with parental consent. So out of the 50, 34 set a minimum age that cannot be overruled by parental consent, 12 set a minimum age, but the services explain that if the child has parental consent, then they can still use the service, and 4 do not set a minimum age at all. There are 3 points that are worth noting about the way that services talk about their minimum age in their governing documents. First, it is rarely explained in clear language, which makes it difficult for children and parents to understand what minimum age applies to them. Then, the minimum age varies depending on the geographic location. So, typically a service would have several minimum age that varies depending on the country. And lastly, we see that the services rarely explain the reasoning on why they landed on a particular minimum age. And very often, the minimum age will be aligned with privacy laws or with contractual capacity laws rather than stemming from a safety-focused perspective. The second key finding is that over half of the services that we looked at use age assurance mechanisms. So they have the technology in place to implement age assurance. However, out of the 28 that use age assurance, only 2 do so systematically at the point of account creation, so before granting access. And the rest, the 26 others, age assurance is triggered on a case-by-case basis. So, for example, to grant access to specific functionalities, such as live streaming or direct messaging, or if there's a doubt about the user's age. Something else that we see is that some of the riskiest services, for example, pornography or random live video chat services, have among the least stringent age assurance mechanisms. And so they will typically ask for the user to just tick a box saying that they're over 18 or just to self-declare their age. And my last point is about age-tiered safeguards. So these are by default settings regarding content, advertising, commercial transactions, etc. And so here we see that the services, most of them, they will have such safeguards in place, but children and parents can often customize these by default settings, so they are not mandatory. And this can result in uneven levels of protections for children. And also, these safeguards vary depending on the country and on the age group, because older children tend to have more permissive or more adjustable settings. So if you want to know more, you can read the whole report. And we are also very pleased to have supported Brazil in conducting a similar exercise with 25 companies, and I believe that the report is being launched today, so we look forward to reading it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nora. Let me now invite Elora Fernandez. She is a researcher. She has her postdoc in KU Leuven Center for IT and IP Law. And she focuses her research on the rights of children and adolescents in the digital world. She has her PhD in law in Rio de Janeiro, together with KU Leuven, dealing with data protection of children. That's her dissertation topic. Elora, you have the floor. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? I guess we can hear you all right. Good. Well, first of all, let me thank CGI and NIC.br for being here. It's a great pleasure to be here with you to talk about such an important topic. And I would like to make some comments about how this topic has been regulated by in the EU. And there are a number of important principles to be discussed to ensure the implementation of these mechanisms for age verification, which are aligned with the principles presented by Lorena and by Ricardo. And if you have time, we can talk more about how data protection authorities have understood what appropriate age verification mechanisms are. Well, first of all, how do different legislations deal with that in the UN? It depends on the mechanism. Age verification mechanisms are used to set apart audience, to restrict the access to content, services, or products. It may happen because of legal prohibition, for example, tobacco, alcohol, pornography, knives, or as a right of diligence for legal compliance. So age verification is not determined in law, but it's a goal to go into the result. For example, prohibition of products and services. This is something that is regulated by member states. Each country has its specific body of law, and they determine that age verification, because the level of certainty is very important in this level, can be checked. But in Europe, as an example, we can talk about the Directive of Social Communication Services, which expects member states to implement, first of all, the directives based on national laws to ensure that some audiovisual media services, TV, radio, but also general video services offering contents that can be harmful to children or adolescents have to be uh, provided with restrictions. And the law determines the need to have age assurance to mitigate the risks. Now, the duty of diligence, we are not talking about legal prohibition of access, but using age assurance as a risk mitigation tool. I'm going to make two examples. GDPR, for example, and it sets principles such as data use. So if the service does not allow children or some specific age rate children to use it, the data cannot be dealt because of the principles of purpose and so on. So age assurance is used as a mitigating factor that applies to the fundamental rights of children and also the risk of compliance. I'm not talking about consent. Understand that. It's not age verification for consent. I'm talking about a mitigating measure to reduce risks. The same risk management is found in the DSA, which also sees data or age assurance as a mitigating factor. And finally, the mechanisms are important not only to restrict access to some specific audiences, but also to ensure the validity of some legal acts. The mechanisms set apart the access and use and help us identify the legal capability of people which are required in some situations. So yes, we are talking about consent to access data or to confirm an internet contract. The validity has to be confirmed. So age verification can be used for that, whether the user is really someone who can have access or can consent to the use of data. GDPR, for example, or any other legislation that regulates these issues would require that. GDPR does not requires age assurance. It just talk about parental control rather. But we have to implement some kind of age verification to make sure that both situations are confirmed. I would like to make some highlights of two guidelines approved last year, one of ATB, it's Data Protection Council, that gathers all the data protection authorities of European Commission. This committee in 2025 issued the guidelines for age verification, and it has brought some basic principles about what would be considered the appropriate measures for age assurance in GDPR. We are talking about data protection really at large. What would be the appropriate measure? The committee understands that it would be something appropriate to reach the purposes of GDPR, implement data protection, privacy, protect the rights of users effectively. There is this correlation between appropriate measure and efficacy, considering the purposes of GDPR. And the same can be done with the Brazilian LGPD. You should take into consideration a number of factors in selecting mechanisms for each case. As the panel has mentioned, it always depends on the risk level. What are the criteria that should be used? 3 criteria are included here: accessibility, methods of age assurance should be readily available and should be used by all people. If the method is not accessible or discriminate groups or cannot be used by children do not have their ID, for example, or immigrants who do not have the readily available ID, there would be a risk of exclusion from services. So accessibility here is a clear indicator to assess the principle of equity in GDPR, which is focused on user. The second criterion is reliability. Methods should provide appropriate and consistent level of precision by identifying that the specific age range is being met, so that unreliable services would be excluded, because service should not convey access to those who are not entitled to, or the other way around. You would be entitled to have access, but were misunderstood by the system, and the results would be problematic either way. And in addition, the need of having robust age assurance. We should avoid the users to be able to circumvent the system. And most systems of self-declaration can be easily circumvented. The committee, when it defined the guidelines about Article 28, there were 2 more criteria rather than talking about accessibility, talks about non-discrimination, which is very much aligned with the principle of fairness and equity. If it's not accessible to some specific groups, it's something discriminatory. Sorry, Elora, your time is up. I apologize for interrupting, says the moderator. And finally, accuracy, Elora says, which is correlated with proportionality of GDPR. Thank you very much. Thank you, Elora. Let me hand it over to Meg Kang. She has her master in the University of São Paulo, LLM from the University of California, and she is the manager of public policies for Meta. And she's responsible for interacting with all elements and players of the ecosystem concerning the regulation of digital platforms. Thank you. Thank you, Renata. Lorena has just used a very interesting sentence. Digital ECA is one of the most advanced pieces of law in the world. And I was wondering why. Because I would like to make a point about listening to all players. I would like to thank Ricardo Horta and Lorena, all your endeavors to understand within the different areas what's going on. What are the main problems and what kind of solutions are available? What are the bottlenecks and what technology is being used? We've had a number of points to interact. I would like to thank CGI for the partnership as well. We've also had some specific moments as private sector to share with you what we've been doing. Another interesting characteristic to this law, as Tony showed us, a very interesting map of the existing regulation, is a very bold piece of law. It is robust and it has tried to understand there is progressive autonomy, the best interest of children, trying to bring these principles into the body of law. Because of the number of items in the law and considering the environment that we live in, I think it's a very bold legislation. As we are talking about age assurance, the law understands the complexity of the ecosystem, and not everyone has solutions that they can afford, or not everyone is willing to pay for solutions. There is a difference between the investments made by the apps or the different players in the system concerning the best protection of children and adolescents. Meta has investing in protection and security since 2006, and we've invested $20 billion so far. When we talk about age assurance, as we have a very diverse ecosystem, the digital ECA in Brazil has also brought this concern. And in Article 12, we know that robust indication about age without identification of the person. So we need robust information about age assurance. It brings efficiency to the whole ecosystem. How can we bring solutions on board? What are the features and functionalities available to children and adolescents in the internet? Well, Tony made a very important comment. Parents cannot supervise children 100% of the time. And that's true. A recent study shows that adolescents access 40 apps per week. And the Tech Kids research showed that two-thirds of parents of adolescents aged 13 to 17 do not use tools to filter which apps young people can download. These numbers show that we are on the right path towards coming up with an effective, democratic, collective solution for parents and the whole ecosystem to reach to a minimum level of protection. The level of protection comes through robust indicators, but also safe API based on Article 12 of Digital ECA as determined there. Let me give you some more visibility here. Regardless of what we've been seeing in all platforms and all apps, Meta has been strongly working on security, especially for children and adolescents. And we have the Family Center, and we have been leading initiatives such as the Lantern Coalition, and we share our findings with other members of the industry. We've been working with NatMac in the Takedown Initiative to protect women, young women, in inappropriate sharing of nudity. We have expanded our control through adolescent accounts, and now we had the managed account at WhatsApp. All these efforts are not something that started this year. They have been put in place and increasingly so, but it depends on what Lorena has said, with the limitation of technology and how technology is being developed. Now, building up on this point, I think it's worth greeting all your efforts, and we are here to develop all the necessary conversations we should have about the topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We do have to count on the collaboration of the state and all those main players in the implementation of digital ECA. Without your help and support, we won't get anywhere. Therefore, this open dialogue opportunity is so relevant. And with that, I thank you so much. Now I'd like to hand over to my dear friend, Tiago Tavares, who is a legal professor since 2005. He's the founder of SaferNet. He's a member of a number of committees about children and adolescent security in Brazil and abroad. He also is part of the agency which is hosted in Amsterdam and with members all over the globe. In addition to be the founder of SaferNet, he was an advisor for CGI and also for the administrative committee for CGI.br. I am so honored to be participating at this panel, which is moderated by the CGI coordinator. Thank you. Thank you all for the invitation. While Meg was talking, I have over 70 apps installed and I don't read the privacy policy. I don't go over half of it and I'm not alone. I always checked time of use of my device, the duration time of use, and 35% of my time was used in the Safari, which is a web navigator that I use to read the news and access institutional websites. And age verification mechanisms used just for app stores would not work nowadays to prevent access of children and adolescents. There are several restricted websites, the marketplace, which sells tobacco and beverages, as to pornographic content sites. The largest multinational, which controls 22 websites with different adult contents. All the ILO ecosystem is based on websites and not apps. I don't know any IO app for streaming or streaming adult content. Since the digital ECA approval during that symposium that we participated for children and adolescents, where we started addressing the technical implementation, but now is the most difficult phase of all. And of course, I'm acknowledging the key role of activists and civil society that had paved the way so far, addressing legal jurisprudence. But today, we have systems architectures to be developed, endpoints to be explained, sensitive data to be protected, and technical support is still to be designed. The civil society has to collaborate during the public hearings that will be released by the Just Ministry and ANPD. We are today starting a marathon, and as any marathon, if you are not well prepared, you are gonna be left behind. And I would like to suggest to this audience an analysis of hypothetical possible scenarios based on some premises. I got my inspiration, the CGI Decalogue, which has supported the ECA internet legal framework and LGPD. Some of those effects have already been mitigated in the slide in Ricardo's presentations, who showed us in his talk which are the requirements demanded by age verification or for age verification. And I would like to list 5 different scenarios for the next 2 years, where together we should think over about age verification in the Brazilian context, based on principle number 1 of the CGI Decalogue, which addresses freedom and privacy and human rights. We have 3 scenarios, one that is pessimistic, another one optimistic, and the third one catastrophic. By the end of the year, the federal government will conclude the development and will allow a public structure for age verification throughout gov.br, and it will deploy the new ID wallet, national ID wallet. That is a model already adopted by several European countries, implementing solutions which are already available in the private sector. How can we guarantee that auditing trails will not be used for identification? What type of premises and safeguards should we establish so the navigation history will not be registered, neither sensitive information? Another scenario, which is the pessimistic one. Public infrastructure for age verification is not ready to go, and the private sector advances on the biometric collection information with the most vulnerable populations, such as they do with the game platforms. Biometry, by definition, is sensitive data. How can we guarantee that the scams of face swap and similar other scams will not be multiplied, increasing even more the number of victims? How can we solve accuracy problems in the methodology? And how can we defeat that market of verification with the bots in the Telegram in Brazil and abroad? We do have evidence, some even already shared with ANPD. Now, scenario C, the optimistic one. Within 2 years, most of the relevant platforms in operation in Brazil will conclude age verification process and will adapt their mechanisms to digital ECA. What to do with the outliers, with companies with the non-compliance hosted abroad without a legal representative in the country? The only the relevant possibility would be the data control, which is which is not successful with the illegal bets. On fourth scenario, over 31 million people have crossed Brazilian frontiers in 2024, 17 million Brazilians and 14 million foreigners, including a number of refugees from Venezuela and other countries. In 2025, Brazil has reached a record on international tourism. A great number of foreigners visited our countries, and 9 million Brazilians travel abroad every year. How can we guarantee that age verification solutions in Brazil will be easy to deploy and interoperable with other countries and jurisdictions to prevent the need of downloading new apps that will just work whenever some documents are recognized in your jurisdiction? And one last scenario, which is the catastrophic one, that is the scenario of democratic erosion. Brazil, ladies and gentlemen, is a young democracy which has survived to an attempt of state coup. On a hypothetical scenario of democratic erosion, what is the risk of age verification to become a justification by a new government to additional data collection? With this catastrophic scenario, how can we guarantee that trails which are collected today will not be used for a re-identification in the future? What type of safeguards should we define to guarantee that the navigation history and the apps used by citizens will not be recorded or registered anyway? And now I have, you have 1 more minute to go, and Sonia Livingston has joined us remotely, and we have to respect the time. Yeah, let me conclude 1 more minute. There is a Dutch cryptograph which tells us that cryptography should be safe and secure, and just the key, except if the key is known by the public sector. Zero knowledge proof is open. Libraries, they operate on open code. Therefore, the infrastructure to be created needs a public repository where all the source code is available to the documentations. Transparent systems of the technical community may analyze, identify failures, and suggest improvements where they will be safer and more resilient. And that is exactly what some European countries do. They keep their public repositories. And let me also highlight the premises that although necessary, age verification is not a silver bullet which will solve all the problems that children and adolescents face in the digital environment. Of course, that age verification has the power to reduce some negative content access. Age verification tries to prohibit children to access some contents, but children, they grow older and they end up accessing non-controlled environments where they'll be exposed to any type of content which may cause damage without having enough skills to acknowledge some risks. And age verification should not be seen as a cheap alternative to a billionaire problem, which is known as content moderation, which ultimately is obligation to look after our citizens in the web, where we try to guarantee, where we try to avoid that false feeling of safety, where problems as disinformation, self-mutilation, sexual abuse, sexual harassment are still taking place within the platform. Children and adolescents that manage to go over those obstacles. They may jump the wall and access prohibited content. And for that, we need to build up safe platforms to human beings. And the road for that is investment on safety. Thank you, Thiago. Sorry to interrupt you, but we have to go on with our agenda. Before I hand over to our next speaker, we have to be very careful and cautious about a number of problems that we will still face. I agree with all the worries, alerts. That's why I mentioned in my opening remarks that this is a historical time and Brazil has its own sovereignty to regulate digital services. And that should not be seen as a silver bullet, neither content moderation. The use of technology and internet should be accompanied by digital literacy to improve the debate in education so children and adolescents, they can better perform in the world as a whole and not just in the web. Therefore, we have to be very careful to that. And thank you, Thiago, for listing a number of them. I would like to apologize. Emanuela, let me find her bio. Manu is representing Alana Institute, but I cannot find her bio. I think they didn't send me. Could you please briefly introduce yourself, Manu from Alana Institute, to which I'd like to make a public compliment for all the hard work developed throughout this process since 2022. Many people call digital ECA as FELCA law, and we should avoid using this terminology because what FELCA did was very important. But to name the law by FELCA, does not allow civil society, academy, and the government, those who have been very active since 2022, for that law to become a reality. So thank you so much, Manu, from Alana Institute, to be here today with us. I am very, very glad to see full house. I cannot thank enough the organization and my dear panelists. I work for Alana Institute as an analyst for public policies and research in digital rights. And I was happy enough to follow the PL 2028, which became a digital ECA. I will share some new insights to foster the debate. What I like so much is that we are stepping into an era of acknowledging children and adolescents in the digital environment. And I will share a case where Alana had an active role. ANPD has an surveillance system at TikTok, and I was present in this case. What have we seen in the appeals? We know that TikTok is a platform where children and adolescents access and use frequently. And back in 2023, a flag was raised about age verification. Once one of the appeals of the company was the following: we don't have children at the platform. If we have them, we remove them. Therefore, we don't need to follow specific laws for children protections. We are not guided or directed for children. Therefore, we are not going to follow specific articles to children. And I got really annoyed with that. And that does not apply just to TikTok, but also to other large companies that end up placing the child within a commercial exploitation, and that child exists. It's someone who's got rights. That's why during its growing process, that child should be treated differently. A treatment that will allow them to participate, to develop themselves, and to mitigate risks and damages. Therefore, we are overcoming a catastrophic scenario of status quo, and digital ECA finally steps out of that. We are no longer in the minority scenario where we would treat children and adolescents as a minority. You know, parents are the one to decide for them, the state, but they are citizens of rights. And now we are stepping into an era where we acknowledge children and adolescents as subjects for rights in the digital environment. And that's very powerful. We are facing an important time. Anytime there are institutional changes, if you are allowed to design new frameworks and to think about governance together with an open government, building up that in a responsible manner, including fundamental rights for all the population. And now we see an opportunity for innovation to design a different internet and to decide which type of internet do we want, which resources are bad and negative to our users. This is the invitation that digital ECI has to all of you. We have to work under collaboration. Age verification is just one of the premises, but does not end there. And as a representative of the civil society, I would like to go back to my bullet points here.
Something that I would like to share with you concerning the adaptation to different age ranges. This is something unique to Brazilian law. Other laws are just considering 16 plus or 16 minus, right, as age bracket. What about 14, 10, 12? Not only to social media, of course, but I mean to the whole ecosystem. It's internet, different products, different age ranges. And I think this is interesting about digital ECA. About safeguards and guarantees, this is a key year to maintain the process that we started way back when. We were talking about a number of safeguards at first when the law started being developed. For example, no reuse of data used for age verification. Therefore, there is this differentiation between age verification and ID verification. Different players. We do not want to concentrate the power in the hands of big tech. This is not the purpose of age assurance, and this is something that has been already built by the civil society since the moment we started developing this first bill of law. Alana Institute is here. We can talk, we can interact, we can get stronger. I have that personal challenge of explaining to my grandma what age verification is. Ricardo mentioned a number of things. Opportunity for discussion. Some people did not know what Litbox was. There were simulators of bats, and now we can discuss the risks as a society and really set absolute priority and full integration of all children and adolescents. Thank you all very much. Well, thank you very much on behalf of CGI, IDP. I would like to thank all of you for being part of this panel and tell you that Sonia Livingstone is here with us. She's already online to start shortly. So we are going to start our next panel. Thank you all very much. Thanks, everyone. I would like to ask you just to hold for a picture. Thank you all very much for your comments and considerations.